My name is Trey Yanks. I'm the chief foreign correspondent for Fox News. And we have a great lineup of panelists today to discuss a very important question. And that question at hand is, when is Europe ready for a Russian attack? So I want to start by introducing our panelists. Radoslaw Sikorski, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs for Poland. Pavlo Palisa, the Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. Kaupo Rosen, the Director General of the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service. And finally, Moritz Schulerik, the President of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Minister Sikorski, I want to start with you. When we look at this question of when is Europe ready for a Russian attack, the context of this question has changed over the past several days. And so I first want to get your take from a perspective of current events on what took place this week with the drone incursion into Poland. Do you believe this was an intentional act by Russia? And how would you describe both the NATO and Polish response?
So yes, less than 36 hours ago, the Polish Operations Command was on active duty, and it was commanding a firefight in the Polish sky, which lasted 7 hours. The first incursion of Russian drones occurred before midnight, and the last shooting down was at 6:30 the following morning. Around 20 drones. The first reports were 19, latest reports 21 drones invaded our airspace, and they were intercepted by German, Dutch, Polish, and some other soldiers under NATO command. Although the command to fire was given by the Polish head of Operations Command. The briefing that we received from our Air Force is that it was unequivocally an attack that came from the Russian Federation, that the drones flew into Poland not only from Ukraine, but also from Belarus. And therefore, we think it was deliberate. We'd had incidents before, one or two drones out of hundreds attacking Ukraine may well have veered off course or been redirected by electronic warfare means. But we don't believe in 20 mistakes at the same time. The incursion was accompanied with a tsunami of Russian disinformation. The intercept was done by F-35s, flown by Allied pilots. F-35s have very precise American-made radars, and so we believe they correctly identified hostile drones. We are surprised by some of the narratives. First of all, that it was a Ukrainian provocation. That's absurd. And secondly, that somehow NATO failed. We shot them all down. If this was failure, what would success look
all
like?
of them.
All the ones that were within range, and certainly none of them reached their targets. There was some property damage. Fortunately, nobody was injured.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen, I want to follow up here from an intel standpoint when it comes to an incident like this. This is largely seen around the world as a new chapter for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, now that it has expanded and NATO countries are under threat. From an intelligence standpoint, when an incident like this happens, and in preparation for such an event, how are you speaking with NATO allies and also with the Ukrainians to prepare for the possibility of similar attacks in the future?
First of all, let me thank you for invitation and being part of this panel. So in the intel world, the cooperation is happening all the time. In NATO systems or structures, it's very well organized, managed, it's well structured, backed up by technology, so there is no issue. And of course, we are in constant contact with the Ukrainian services, trying to support them in their operations and exchanging information. So when Russians start to prepare for a conflict, they usually make at least two calculations. One is the calculation regarding escalation control. They would like to control the escalation and de-escalation according to their terms. And the second calculation is the comparison of combat potential of the opposite side and own side. So it is very important for us that both calculations come out in our favor in the future. In order to do that, we have to have credible plans, because I'm sure that the Russian services are able to, let's say, capture at least parts of the plan or elements of the plan. And we also have to make sure that these plans are backed up by real resource. That means people, tanks, stocks, ammunition, everything must be in place. So we have to make sure that whenever the Russian calculates something, those calculations are in our favor.
Absolutely. And you'll see, if you are on your phones now or just after this panel, there are, as we speak, significant decisions being made in the context of NATO about preparation for the possibility of other incursions into Poland or NATO countries. Mr. Palisa, I want to ask you about the role that Ukraine can play in helping allies prepare for this reality, understanding that the past 3.5 years Ukraine has spent under drone and missile attack. What role can Ukraine play in helping its European allies prepare for the possibility that this conflict expands?
Thank you for your question. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And in terms of your question, first of all, Ukraine has thing or something which can be bought by any resources, money, and so on. It's our experience. Experience against Russia. And I want to remind that Russia is 28 times bigger than Ukraine in terms of territory, and 3 times bigger in terms of population. And before full-scale invasion, a lot of people in the world thought that this is the second military superpower in the world. We are standing more than 3.5 years of full-scale invasion. And of course, I want to say thank you personally from me and from all Ukrainian soldiers for our partners, for their help and support. And now I'm talking not only about something material, not only about ammunition, not only about some training and different kinds of weapon. Support in informational domain, in terms of global information, in political support, is really important for us. It helps us to do our job well. At the same time, in terms of your question, the biggest thing is our experience. as President Zelensky said yesterday, we are ready to share it. We are ready to help to give our experience in terms of air defense in different echelons, how to manage it, how to fight against the ballistic, how to fight against the Shaheeds and other threats. This is the first thing that we are able and we are ready to share with our partners to help to prepare for future.
Thank you. Mr. Schulerich, the Kiel Institute recently published a report titled Fit for War by 2030. Are you optimistic about the current trajectory of European military readiness in the context of what we've seen unfold over the past several days?
Yeah, thank you. But that report had a question mark at the end, and the answer in the report was quite clearly no. I just urge you to look at the numbers, and I'm the economist, so I'm going to contribute some for you. If you look at the latest edition of our Ukraine support tracker that we produce at the Kiel Institute, you will see this is now Europe's war. Europe has overtaken the US as the main supplier in terms of the financial volumes and the equipment. And at the same time, our stocks are depleting, and we haven't managed to ramp up the industrial capacity fast enough for that buildup. If you look in the report, there will be examples of many weapon systems where Russia now produces in 2 to 3 months the entire stock, for example, of the German armed forces in that weapon, if you look at some artillery or tanks. So the changeover of the Russian economy to proper war economy and the very slow ramp up, if you want to even call it that, in terms of increasing industrial and production capacities, means that in some ways we've actually fallen behind more than we used to. Let me add one sentence. A lot has happened, and I don't want to deny this. Like a year ago, I don't know if Neil Ferguson is still here. We were in Germany in the parliament, and we produced this piece and said, like, Germany really needs to change its debt brake and free up the funds, make it possible to rearm. And now we're here a year later, and a lot has happened. We've changed the constitution. We have at the Kiel Institute produced a paper that has been pretty much then followed through. So we now have the financial means to do that. Where I think things are really tight now and where things are not working is sort of the link between the economics and the military needs. So we really need an Operation Warp Speed to ramp up military production capacity, and that's not happening yet.
Mr. Sikorski, I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you see the incidents of the past several days as a wake-up call? And how would you describe the readiness of Europe to repel a Russian attack on its own?
It is a wake-up call, and we are satisfied with the tsunami of support we've received from allied countries, and not just words, but declarations of reinforcing our anti-aircraft and anti-missile capacity. But to answer your main question, we are living in a really interesting moment. So, on the one hand, the Russians invaded Ukraine on hyper-optimistic assumptions, and they failed. And they've actually lost the entire original army with which they invaded has been annihilated. And it was a post-Soviet army. They've now built a new army, which is much more modern. And by competing with Ukraine in drones, in electronic warfare, in deep strike capacity, they've actually modernized faster, I agree, than we have. But let's remember, they invaded Donbass 10 years ago and are still fighting in Donbass. They have not been able to conquer Donbass for 10 years. What we have done in Europe, from admittedly a very low base, since President Trump's first term in office, we have already doubled our defense expenditure. And at The Hague, we promised to double again, which means that by the end of the decade, our expenditure on defense in real terms, dollar for dollar, will be the same as the United States. And we don't have a global empire to manage. We only need to defend our own territory. And we don't need to have an army as strong as the US Army. We just need to be stronger than Putin. Actually, we need to be strong enough to deter Putin. So I think by the end of the decade, we will be able to do it on our own, which means that we will gain respect both in Moscow and in Washington.
Thank you. Mr. Schuler, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, very quickly, because actually I thought when we lifted the debt brake in Germany for defense spending, I thought we were exactly there. Yes, now we can do it, but it turns out it matters a lot on how we spend it. And one, do we get the production capacities ramped up quickly enough? It doesn't help to have all the money if you don't actually translate it into real equipment. And B, it also matters in terms of the mentalities, what we spend it on. Let me give you just two examples, and I'm sorry to my German colleagues, I just know the German numbers, so it's probably similar across the European NATO countries. If you look at the latest UK defense review, there is this idea that defense spending should be 40-40-20, 40 in unmanned reusable systems, 40% in unmanned loitering ammunition one-off systems, and 20% in sort of manned legacy systems. I don't know if this is sort of what Ukrainians would also agree, these are the big lessons, how to confront Russia, how to fight the war of the future. But let's say it's 80-20 unmanned versus manned. If I look at what the German defense spending that we now have increased so much was used for, we've done the numbers in Kiel, it's 95% legacy manned systems. So it really matters also what war, what defense you prepare for and how you do it. One last number, and I promise it's the last to bore you. If you look at the US defense budget, 15% of the defense budget are research and development expenditures, are for new technologies, for refining. If you look at the average European defense budget, our R&D expenditures is 2%, 3%. So we're not yet there where we actually prepare for that high-tech, AI-driven, advanced software-driven, autonomous system-driven war of the future.
Which is why we should be buying Ukrainian licenses, because they've already tested what works and what doesn't. And the other key figure is how much of your defense budget is spent on procurement. I speak here as a former defense minister. In Poland's case, 52% is procurement. Good.
Mr. Rosen, I want to ask you about your 2025 security report, where you wrote, the Kremlin has chosen a path of long-term confrontation. In the context of these numbers being discussed and the preparedness of Europe, how do you forecast what's going to happen in the years ahead, and how do you, more importantly, prepare?
Well, the future depends fully on us. And just to maybe add to the previous comment, currently the Russian military industrial complex has reached its maximum capacity. This is what we see. Increase the production numbers from there, very difficult for the Russians. So actually we have a chance to catch up, maybe, if we do the right things in Europe. And secondly, the Russians assess the confrontation with Europe regarding the arms race, as they call it, and it seems that they are a little bit concerned. Their own assessment says that in a mid or longer term, they will lose the arms race if Europe really now starts to invest in production and everything. So of course they're already thinking how to counter that. And for that purpose, they have developed, let's say, operations in the information confrontation domain, spreading the narrative of war-mongering Europe, peace. The idea is to turn the European electorate anti-war, negative against European rearmament, and we see that they are actively already doing this operation. So this is something we have to keep in mind, that we keep the support of European population for all the plans what we might have, and it will be challenging, I see, because the Russians are absolutely not seeing. They already assess the future.
Mr. Palisa, I want to ask you about Ukrainian positions, and Ukrainian officials have been very clear. They want their allies to remember that Ukraine is a gateway to Europe. And when we talk about the delivery of weapons systems and air defense systems, as someone who has served on the front lines in this country and now serves in a different role, but with that experience in mind, can you talk us through what it means when there is a delay in support for Ukraine, whether it's air defense or the weapons needed on the front lines?
Any delay, it's Ukrainian lives. It's to be shot, because last year, it seems to me, my speech here was about time. Why time is important, and here I want to add something to previous comments of my colleagues. Resources in war, of course, it's important. The volume of money, of production capacity, yes, it's really important. But the most important thing is time, because you can't prepare soldier, unit, brigade, or army corps in a moment. You need time for that. And I think creating your new European deterrence or defense strategy, you should take into account this. About delay of any resources, we are paying for it by lives of our soldiers and our citizens, unfortunately. Of course, we are appreciated for all that our partners have done for us. And of course, we would be happy if we would get anything that we need to deter Russian aggression in time. And we, anyway, in any case, we are trying to find some solutions, trying to be creative. You know that limits burns creativity. Because, just a simple example, in 2023, there was a huge delay with ammunition, artillery rounds, artillery shells, 155. And at that time, my unit was at the Bakhmut direction, and we feel how it looks like personally. And for every commander, there wasn't any options to think about something new. That's an example how we get the FPV drone units because of lack of ammunition. How we get the different types of bombers because of lack of ammunitions. That's it. Thank you.
How do you see the connection between the timeline in which Ukrainian forces receive the military aid they need and the preparedness for NATO countries in the event that this conflict expands? Explain to us why it's important that Ukrainian troops receive this in a timely manner and how that links to NATO countries being prepared for the possibility of a larger war.
Okay, I'll try. But this is my personal view. First of all, the first thing, when Ukraine stands, I think just from military point of view, Russia will not take a risk to invade Europe. Yes, of course, Russia probably will prolong the hybrid war. In my opinion, it's already in Europe now. That's why it's in Europeans' interests to help us to keep the line, to get everything that we need, and to win time for Europe to prepare.
Mr. Rosen, I want to ask you about this concept of hybrid war. The Munich Security Conference earlier this year, you specifically spoke about this term hybrid and the issue that you take with describing Russia's aggression as hybrid, not just on the battlefield, but on a larger scale. Help the audience understand where Russia is fighting.
Well, you are right. I don't like the word hybrid, schmybrid. We should call the incidents or activities by name. We see that the Russians are conducting, let's say, kinetic sabotage operations throughout Europe with the goal of undermining our support to Ukraine and disrupting the supply chain to Ukraine. This operation is happening under authorization of Russia's leadership, so it's not a coincidence or it's not a individual people's initiative. These activities are destroying European infrastructure. There has been also assassination plans, which has been public. So this is really going on. The Russians have that capability now. And this capability is usable in many different contexts. The problem for services is that it is very cheap to conduct with low energy. And it eats our resource, of course. So the best deterrence here is to make sure that, or my message to the governments is to make sure that the counterintelligence and intelligence services have proper mandate and tools to deal with this issue. In Europe, I see there are, let's say, very different levels regarding that. Some services can do more, and some services are more restricted, and Russians are always looking for weak spots. I can say that in Estonia, we have the tools. We have by now, around 20 people in custody connected to the sabotage activities. And these people get very long prison sentences since we classified these actions not as vandalism, but as, depending on the individual, as a treason or activities against the Estonian government. And this brings 10 to 15 years. So we see this as a very good deterrence tools. And we make these cases public. So this is a good way to fight. And other point is, of course, the cooperation between services throughout Europe. And also cooperation with Ukrainian services who have a lot of experience in dealing with this type of activities from the enemy.
Mr. Sikorski, you wanted to follow up?
My definition of hybrid is everything below the threshold of kinetic. And interestingly, to the best of my knowledge, the Russian drones that invaded Poland's airspace were duds. They did not have warheads, which suggests to me that the Russians wanted to test us, but they didn't want to start a war. And below kinetic, we have a plenty. It's not just making a nuisance of yourself on the internet. It's disinformation, all right, but it's also DDoS attacks on institutions. Our hospitals get attacked. That can lead to casualties. If you can't ring emergency, someone might die. We've had arson attacks, and they're really duplicitous about it. So a guy that's been convicted in Poland was a Ukrainian living in Germany, paid by GRU to come to Poland and to try to set a factory on fire. But we know they did it. We have evidence. It's, of course, espionage. It's death squads. It's not just Salisbury. It's not just Berlin. There were assassinations in Bulgaria, in the Czech Republic, in other places. And the Russians, of course, have an advantage. We are open societies. And we are a confederation. They have unity of command, and they are a police state. And of course, we don't try to start fires or assassinate people in the Russian Federation. So what we should do is to limit their ability to do it. So I've closed down 2 Russian consulates. We've limited the ability of Russian diplomats to travel beyond the capital province, and we call on other allies in Europe to do the same. Because this is absurd. We think 40% of Russian diplomats, and there are over 2,000 in the European Union, are spies. Think how many agents they can service. And they are trying to destroy the European Union and at the same time benefit from the Schengen zone ability to travel across national borders. They should only be allowed to travel in the country to which they are accredited, where counterintelligence can keep tabs on them.
Thank you. We've talked about the...
If I may just add to this topic, another vector of attack towards us is so-called maybe political warfare. We see that Russians are constantly analyzing statements of different Western politicians, whether national level or European level. We see them again approaching different people who they assess are maybe receptive to Russian approaches. Unfortunately, we see that Russians are not as toxic anymore as they were like a couple of years ago. And we see some of the Western politicians again who are open to Russian approaches, who accept invitations to travel to Russia, to different venues. But the point is, of course, that these events are not purely scientific or just talk about the peace or whatever topic. These events are well prepared from the Russian side. It's fully choreographed. The statements or talking points are approved by presidential administration. So this is not a democracy to democracy conversation. So I just urge to be very careful to whatever Russians show up and talk to you very nicely and whatever approach they choose. Just I warn against that.
So we now understand the issue at hand in the context of this question, when is Europe ready for a Russian attack? We're going to shift now into what can be done in terms of preparedness and discouraging Russian aggression. And I want to talk about sanctions, Mr. Schulerich. In terms of the European approach so far, what more can be done to support Ukraine and to discourage Russian aggression as to avoid the possibility that this conflict expands?
Right. Before I come to the sanctions, let me say, I think on the sort of economic, military, industrial level, there's a lot more that Europe could do. We should have an internal or common market for defense. We should have joint procurement to bring prices down. I think we should have clear quantitative goalposts for what production capacity we should have that are matched to what Russia can do. So by the end of 2026, Europe should be in a position to produce, I'm picking a number here, the Ukrainians will help us, 5 million drones a year and 1,000 tanks and 1,000 rockets. We're far away from having that coordinated European approach to building our industrial base. And as much as we talk about the high-tech war and the drone war, I mean, in the end, this will also be a war of attrition. And I think, I mean, we have the drone factory out there. It is about mass. It is about getting the industrial structure in place to be able to credibly deter and have the ability to produce. So I think that is absolutely crucial. And I think we're far away from using, in terms of also market design, in terms of contract design, all the tools that economists have to get as much bang for the buck in that case it really is the right word, as we could. So I think we're still doing business as usual, where most of German military companies, the big ones, are still working one shift. They should be working 3 shifts, and I think that's true for most of Europe. So we're still in this business as usual speed, and we should go into warp speed in terms of production capacity. So sorry.
Why do you think that is? There are capabilities that are not being used and production abilities that are not being used.
Well, I'm torn. Sometimes I think, I just mentioned this earlier, like a year ago, Germany wasn't able to spend on defense more than because there was the debt brake still in place, and it was a very tight situation. At least we've lifted that. And you can say, well, a lot has changed in the past year, but then if you look at the actual sort of transmission on the ground, very slow. Why? So I think one is the mentalities are just not there. We have these. I think European armies have been undersupplied for 20 years, and now there's the moment where they can buy all the stuff they always wanted to have, but the stuff they always wanted to have isn't necessarily the stuff they need in the future. So there's a little bit disconnect. But then for the stuff they always wanted to have, which is a little bit the old stuff, all the processes are in place. You just press a button and you get 20 more tanks. I mean, when you get them, but we don't have the processes for the new procurement, as Radek just said, like you license Ukrainian production, cooperate. This is all stuff that takes time to build up. B, I think we haven't had to think about resource mobilization in Europe in that context since World War II. I mean, it's just that it's sort of the economics of do you auction the artillery ammunition? How do you if you think about the vaccine production as sort of the last big mobilization, we managed with Operation Warp Speed in the US, but also then in Europe, to write contracts with the producers that incentivized massive scale, economies of scale and production expansion with the goal of delivering the vaccines tomorrow or like in a few months. The way we're structuring defense production is we basically say what we want and wait until the companies can deliver. So there's a lot to have. I think Europe really needs to think hard about that link between economics and the military.
Thank you. Minister Sikorski.
I agree with all that. And let me just add, we wasted the first 2 years of the war. Politicians talked the talk, but the contracts were not written. The contracts are now being written, but the sense of urgency is still not quite there. It's all in the head. Ukraine is on a wartime footing. We are still on a peacetime footing. And of course, we are not at war, but we are definitely in crisis. And so in Poland, we've passed a law which short circuits procedures, environmental permissions, building permissions for building new factories. And we have a little bit of acceleration, but still not enough. And on sanctions, there are some really low-hanging fruit. So when we had our meeting in Lviv, our Ukrainian hosts showed us the innards of the Russian drones that have been shot down over Ukraine. And I have to tell you how embarrassed I was to see what proportion of the electronics, of the engines, of the components of those drones were Western manufactured. I'd like to see at last prosecutions of the guys who are doing it. And I haven't heard of a single one yet.
Have you delivered this message to your counterparts?
The problem is the following. We have actually the same legal authority in Europe and in the United States to go after people who break sanctions, both as regards physical stuff and as regards transactions, either in the dollar or in the euro. The problem is enforcement. In the US, you have a team of 1,600 people who, at least until recently, I'm told the work has stopped, unfortunately, have been updating the list of companies who have crossed the threshold. Because remember, it's not enough to pass the sanction. The bad actors constantly find ways to go around them. So you have to update the list of sanctions of companies, and I'm told that this work is not being done. And in Europe, it's even worse, because the sanctions are passed at the European level for legal reasons, but enforcement is with the member states. And some member states have the bureaucratic capacity to do it, and some just don't. And so this is the supply of dual-use stuff. But the other thing is Russia's income from the sales of oil and gas. Russia is using these hundreds of so-called shadow fleet tankers. These are very old ships under flags of convenience, or sometimes no flag at all, plying the trade mostly through the Baltic. About 3-4 crossing the Danish Straits a day. Here's a number. I asked the chairman of BP how much it costs to clean up the oil spill in the Gulf of America, previously known as the Gulf of Mexico, when Deepwater Horizon blew up. $80 $2 billion. Imagine if these Russian shadow fleet tankers start spilling oil in the Baltic Sea without a flag, without insurance. It'll be a complete disaster. In self-defense, also for environmental reasons, we should end this anarchy on high seas.
Mr. Rosen, I think that European partners of Ukraine understand the consequences of continuing to buy Russian oil and gas. They realize the connection between the funding for the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the purchase of Russian oil and gas. From your perspective, how do you convince European partners to at least reduce the amount they're buying and to move forward toward a posture that isolates Russia even further?
Yeah, it's let's say it's probably not a task for me to, let's say, convince our partners. But what I can say is that we see that sanctions targeting financial system and sanctions targeting energy sector are really working actually. Of course, the Russians are constantly creating very creative solutions, developing new payment systems, for example, between Russian and Chinese banks currently. And in the energy sector, I think one of the best sanction regime or sanction options, among other things, are the Ukrainian strikes against the Russian infrastructure in that regard. And I see with deep satisfaction that the strikes have been recently much more precise, hitting the right equipment in the distilleries. And I think it's a good way to go. Regarding other options, oil price cap. So let's say $1 per barrel difference means for Russia between 120, 140 million dollars per month. $10, 1.2, 1.4 billion per month. So secondary sanctions, for example, probably work in our benefit, at least. Then, but let's take the task at hand. Our task currently is to support Ukraine. For us, this all has been honestly very low cost, actually. It's only money for us. Ukrainians lose people, and this is something you cannot replace. And let's imagine what would happen if Russians would take this country over. They would absolutely try to turn this country against the West. The people who are left here, the resources, the let's say industrial potential, raw materials, Russians will all try to make this work in our benefit. So I think we have to concentrate also on the near-term task, which is support Ukraine in the fight.
We're talking here about economic and military pressure to put on the Russians, and you raised a very important point about the precision of Ukrainian strikes against Russian energy infrastructure. Late last year, I was with President Zelensky on the Eastern Front lines. We were interviewing soldiers and speaking with forces there, and hours later, the Ukrainians ordered the use of US-supplied ATACMS into Russian territory to put military pressure on the invaders. I want to ask you, Mr. Palisa, how has the posture of the Ukrainian forces changed, and also the ability, not just the weapons that are already here in Ukraine, but the willingness of Western partners who provide those weapons to allow Ukraine to actually use them on the battlefield? So how has that changed in recent months and years?
That gives opportunity to armed forces of Ukraine to put their own sanctions on oil and gas industry of Russia. Actually, that gives a great opportunity to create a system of precise targeting of the main and painful points of oil transportation system and the gas transportation system, pumping plants, And I'm not sure about the numbers, but for last, it seems to me, month, after Ukrainian deep strike targeting, there was something like 17% of decreasing of the capabilities of Russian oil industry. So you saw that they have problems with the fuel on gas stations inside of Russia. Of course, it gets effect on population, and maybe more Russians will think about what are we doing in Ukraine, actually. And it's important, and we are trying to improve and increase our capabilities to hit the targets deeply in Russia. And it's like a asymmetric engagement, and we will increase it in future and improve it, of course.
Thank you. Mr. Sikorski?
I just wanted to highlight President Trump's call on Europeans to stop buying oil from Russia. And I will do here what I did at the Foreign Affairs Council. I again call on Hungary and Slovakia to start buying the oil for their refineries from the south, not from Russia.
Thank you.
I agree. I mean, the economics of sanctions are actually reasonably simple. They become more effective the more concentrated the export goods of a country is. And in Russia's case, it is very simple because it's so concentrated. The economy is a little bit of a gas station. But from the very first month of the war, and I remember back the conversations with the Treasury, with the Commerce Department, if you're serious about sanctioning Russian oil exports, you have to be willing to take the consequences in terms of the global oil supply. And that's always been the I mean, coming back to what we said earlier, where we didn't really want to go far enough. We had the idea with the price cap, but then even with the price cap, we've been quite generous, like having, assuming production costs in Russia being really high, they probably aren't that high. So I think the important insight is really, if we want to be serious, it is about stopping these commodity oil and gas exports. I mean, on the gas side and on the pipeline, it has stopped, but on the oil side. But then we have to, if you sanction one of the largest oil producers in the world, you have to be willing to take the consequences in terms of oil supplies and oil prices.
How do you move this idea forward? It's discussed often.
Look, I think we have in the macro economy is less, at least the Western economies are much less dependent on oil than they used to be. We've diversified out of oil. We've become much more energy efficient. So there is a worry, especially gasoline, gas prices at the pump for American consumers. They occupy a big idea in sort of in the heads of American policymakers. I think on the European side, given the taxation of gasoline is so high, an increase in oil prices would not be the economic disaster that many people fear it could be.
Since you're asking for ideas, I know what we would do if we were at war with Russia. If we were, we would announce a naval exclusion zone in the North Sea at the entrance to the Danish Straits, and we would stop Russian oil tankers from taking the oil to international markets. We are not at war with Russia, but the minimum that we should do is to examine whether those tankers meet basic technical criteria and that they have actionable insurance in case of spillage.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen, I want to ask you about an interview you did with Reuters late last year saying NATO and national military plans must be credible, backed up with real resources. What type of resources are you talking about?
Well, in any case, if the military makes plans must be realistic, and plans must be backed up by real-world resource. People, ammunition, equipment, everything you need for a modern military to work. If we just make plans and do not back up these with, let's say, equipment and people and so on, this will be not credible. Russians, as I mentioned, Russians will try to figure out what is our plan, and then they will also count our stocks and tanks and everything we have at our disposal. And they are capable enough to figure it out or create an assessment what's the actual situation. And again, and then we come to the calculation part, comparison of combat potential for both sides. And then they do this calculation with a very complicated formula, what the Russians always like to do, very mathematically. These formulas are taught in the General Staff Academy. But we have to make sure that this calculation, when they come to the numbers, then these numbers are, let's say, favorable to us. That's our task.
Mr. Schulerich, how have the numbers gotten better over the past several years? We know there have been supply chain issues, timing issues on the battlefield, and political disagreements about the course of this conflict. What's changed? And when you look forward, what else needs to change?
You mean in terms of support for Ukraine?
In terms of support and actually getting the equipment and things needed in place, not only to support Ukraine, but also to answer our initial question, keeping NATO countries prepared for the possibility of an expanded conflict.
Right, so I think I was one to, I said last year as well, I mean, if you look at the actual numbers of support for Ukraine, we're still at a point where I think as much as we've done, it's a drop, it's a small macroeconomic number. I can tell you the German number, it's 0.15% of German GDP that we use this year to support Ukraine militarily. It's a macroeconomic rounding error. And I think, number one, the cheapest and most effective way to increase security in Europe is increase these numbers substantially while we ramp up production in Europe. The most important, from an economic side, the most important change now is to use the financial leeway that we have, the financial possibilities that have come in Germany through the change of the debt brake, but also through the commitments at the NATO summit, and use, I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I, as an economist, but try to use these funds as efficiently as we can. I mean, coming back to the drones that flew into Poland, I don't know if you've done the math, Radek, but these 20 drones probably cost, whatever, altogether, maybe 20,000 euros. Scrambling these F-35 fighters was, I don't know if you've done math, but a factor of 10 higher than that. So getting sort of the economics into defense is something that, since we've spent so little in Europe over the past years, and also since it's so sort of so national, we have these like 27 European nations, I mean, 2 maybe not playing ball, but with more than 20 European nations that need to agree. There's very entrenched national procurement systems, national military traditions. So I fear if we really want to get these financial possibilities we have, translate them into real military capacities, we need to overcome these obstacles and use much more economics.
Thank you.
I agree that the economics of the battlefield are very important. And as you know, in Ukraine, there is a very sophisticated target selection system run by a US company. I don't want to do crypto advertising, so I won't mention the name. But it tells you not only where the target is, but which is the most cost-effective way in which to neutralize it. And of course, these cheaper drones should be shot down with machine guns, not with Sidewinder missiles. So we need to develop the ability to confront Russia at every level of the escalation ladder, which should be doable. Russia is a $2 trillion economy, only double the economy of Poland. We are, as Europe, we are an $18 trillion economy. But you do not win wars with GDP. You have to translate the GDP into actual stuff. And we are only at the beginning of the process.
Mr. Palisa, if you could add to that, the Ukrainians have been quite successful in deterring large-scale Russian attacks using what they have. And so if you could talk just briefly about how that's happened and there's a cost difference in terms of the machine guns, for example, used to shoot down Shahed drones. Talk to me about that and what NATO allies can learn from that.
Actually, the reason is simple. We just don't have other options. It's only because of limits and because of limits of. Thank you. Because of limits, we need to think how to manage with what we have now, and to turn on our creativity. Thanks to God, we have a lot of creative people, smart people, and we already have enough experience, in targeting, which my colleagues mentioned. And we have a lot of to study from our partners, of course. But at the same time, now we are enough good to conduct some targeting projects, in different points, painful points in Russian economy. And of course, we are trying to keep the level of expenditures that we can afford in terms of how to fight with Shaheeds, with massive attack of Shaheeds. Actually, I'm pretty sure that in the world there is no country which is able now to 100% cover even one object, critical object from the such a massive attack like Russians doing.
Absolutely. We've talked about current events, the drone incursion into Poland. We have talked about the threat from Russia, what can be done from an economic standpoint and a military standpoint to pressure the Russians. And in our last couple of minutes here, I would just like to conclude by asking you the question at hand, each one of you, if you could be brief in your response. When is Europe ready for a Russian attack? Mr. Schulerich.
Okay, you want a short answer. It obviously depends on the attack, etc. But I think if we translate the debate that we've had over the past 3 years from talking about inputs, 2% of GDP, defense spending, 3% of GDP, 5%, if we translate that debate into precise quantitative goals for what we want to be able to produce, if we go from 3% to GDP, talking about 3% of GDP, to talking about how do we manage to have the capacities to produce 5 million drones in Europe by the end of 26. And we do this for all these, then I think it can go very fast. I think one of the key insights from, if you look at the pandemic, is once you really concentrate economic forces on a certain goal, and you set quantitative goalposts, and you use the right instruments to expand production capacities, things can go very fast.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen?
I think Europe will be ready when Ukraine wins, because after that there will be no threat.
Mr. Palisa?
I think resources in war is a really important thing, but war is not only about the resources. I think a lot of our partners should invest in their societies. Of readiness of their societies to stand and to fight and to resist. And of course, we are ready to help our partners in where we are able to help. And of course, we are ready to share our experience.
Thank you.
I started my professional life as a war correspondent in Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union lost 13,000 dead over 10 years, and that war cost them $100 billion. So Soviet leaders had the good sense to call it quits after that. Putin has already lost 1 million dead and wounded, and many times the expenditure and the equipment. I think already today we could double that number, and by the end of the decade, it will be clear even to Mr. Putin.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our panelists for their insight today, and also the Yalta European Strategy Conference and Mr. Pinchuk for giving us this forum to have this very important discussion to answer the question at hand. Thank you.